Okay, we're talking about Dark and Darker again today. I've been seeing a lot of stuff on social media about this, a lot of people's opinions floating around on videos, as well as, of course, tens of thousands at this point comments discussing what's going on. Most people are, of course, on Iron Mace's side. Just as a brief recap on what's going on, Iron Mace, South Korean development studio, making Dark and Darker, one of the bigger indie games that people are excited for, one of those that has done really well, 100,000 testers, played by millions of people, everyone really excited for it to release. Nexon, which is a big company, I think either biggest or second biggest game company in South Korea, are suing one specific individual that is involved in Iron Mace, that's involved in Dark and Darker, and of course are DMCAing and removing Dark and Darker from the Steam platform for essentially stealing. They're claiming that they've stolen this game, assets within this game, source code of this game from Nexon. Now, of course, most people, as I said, are on the side as consumers of Iron Mace for very clear and obvious reasons. People like this game. People love David and Goliath. They love the small, the plucky game studio versus the big, horrible corporation. And we know small people good, big corporation bad. It's the very easy black and white way to look at this. Unfortunately, that's not how the world works, especially not in a legal manner, which we can have a discussion about the pay-to-win aspects of law in general. And we can have a discussion about why certain things should change, but that doesn't really play a big factor into this, because there's way more to this situation than what people appear to be discussing and actually acknowledging on surface level dives into this Dark and Darker situation, this dungeon, to draw a parallel between the game type and this situation. So basically what most people's interpretation is that Dark and Darker developers, Iron Mace, have refuted and destroyed the claims of big evil Nexon by releasing a response to everything that they've said. First, what happened was the Nexon developers, the Nexon company, sent the police to the Dark and Darker studio, to Iron Mace's studio, and had it raided. And I will just say, by the way, they didn't send the police like, I'm going to call up my buddy and he works for the police and they're going to go raid this studio. This was executing a search order, which you're only going to get if you provide substantial evidence to the point where the police can then say, yes, this is actually something we need to go and do, because there is merit. So this does look like, even from the search warrant being applied and executed, that there is some merit to these claims based on that alone, not even taking into account anything else. Now, I've seen people say that Iron Mace came out and said nothing was found, so therefore, this is a case closed situation. They're clearly just bullying them. But I would put this to you, as anybody following this is in like an objective manner. Whenever, in the case of somebody being raided by the police or any kind of civil or criminal dispute in the law, would somebody come out and say, yeah, actually, panic, guys, they did find lots of stuff and we're fucked? It just doesn't happen. So anyone saying, oh, Iron Mace said this, and you're not acknowledging that they said this, so you're biased because you're on the side of Nexon for some reason, clearly not. I'm typically on the side of truth, and I think the best thing to do here is wait for all the evidence, but basically judge what we have based on what we can see, use our common sense and analyze it based on what we think is going to happen, as opposed to taking sides, which I'm definitely not doing. They think that if you don't take the side of Iron Mace saying, oh, nothing happened, they didn't find anything, so therefore we're all good. I think that's pretty infantile in terms of logic, because nobody ever says, yeah, they found loads of stuff, we're fucked. This is our liability, we're admitting to all these things. It just doesn't happen. As does whenever anyone gets in a legal battle, full stop. They don't admit to fault, because then you lose. That's not what happens. You argue your points, even if you're in the wrong, because that's how the law works. So basically, Iron Mace has said, we've done nothing wrong. Absolutely everything is just falsified, and these people are saying we've done X, Y, and Z, and we've not done X, Y, and Z, but they do admit to some of X and some of Y and some of Z. People also seem to be getting hung up on the fact that this DMCA has no merit to it because the files are all Unreal assets. And I'm not a lawyer, let me just get that one out of the way, but I do have a little bit of experience with some things like this, and also have followed other similar examples of things like this happening. The fact that it's all Unreal assets doesn't necessarily mean what you guys think it means, that this is completely frivolous and they're going to essentially get away with this scot-free, because this is not being looked at in a vacuum, right? It's not, oh, they used assets so they couldn't have stolen anything in a vacuum. Because obviously just making a game using assets, if another game uses assets, this is what people are arguing. If two games use the same assets, one game sues the other over using the same assets that they don't even own, that I agree would be absolutely ridiculous. That is also not what is being alleged here, or what is the problem. What the problem is that within context of this whole project, that is just one facet of what they're alleging is essentially copying from the original source material. It's not that they're using assets, it's that they're using all the same assets that they knew were being used on Project P3 when the developers were working at Nexon on Project P3. 10 of the 23, I think it is, employees who were working at P3 now work at Iron Mace, including the project lead. So what people need to understand is that the allegations are based on this. One person was working on P3, literally developing the game for Nexon, and during COVID, he asked for permission to essentially make a personal server to take files that he could then obviously work better with due to the office being closed and things like that, and then his team was using that. Nexon agreed to this, but at some point Nexon said, we don't want you doing this anymore, you need to stop. And he did. And this is in his own words, by the way, he admits to doing this. He then later on spun the server back up and continued to host confidential files that he had access to only because being the lead of Project P3, without Nexon allowing him to. So what he was doing was taking confidential proprietary files from the company-specific servers, which they told him to leave them on there and not to use on personal servers anymore, putting them on there anyway, and then claiming later on, which they say in this, that Nexon must have known about it, so therefore they weren't doing anything wrong, which doesn't get you off of anything. Just because you do something that could be, I'm using the example here, illegal, but of course in a civil matter, not actually illegal. Just because you do something and the law doesn't find out about it doesn't mean it's not illegal, it just means you've not been caught. So obviously that doesn't really hold water, at least in my mind. It's basically saying, oh, it's not my fault, they didn't know I was doing something they told me to stop doing, so therefore they have no case. Now, interestingly, what people seem to be mistaking here is that they think the DMCA is like frivolous and that's the whole thing. It's not. It's part of the process. Now, obviously, when you believe that your copyright has been infringed or that somebody has stolen trade secrets from you, one of the steps you would perform is a DMCA. And I've just read through this, and I don't see where people are getting mixed up here that this is completely without merit whatsoever. It actually seems like it has a fairly solid basis, especially when you start going through the Korean articles that have been circulating related to this. Now, a lot of people are going to go, Korea is corrupt, and there's some additional context I can give you here because I've done a little bit of research about this over time, covering things in Korea, such as the political climate and things like that. There is a term in Korea, chaebol. I'm probably saying that wrong, but essentially what the chaebol are big families of supreme wealth who run most of the big operations within Korea. And people say Nexon is run by, you know, some of the newer blood of chaebol. And this term comes from, I think it was before, but it really got popularized in the 60s, I believe, when one of the military leaders performed a coup, took over Korea, and then essentially, because he wanted to make Korea stronger, certain families got preferential treatment. And then over the course of the next 50, 60 years, the chaebol, who earned a lot of money and basically became solidified as the elites of Korean society, they put a lot of money into getting elected the people who they wanted to be elected, which is why you'll typically see in Korea, pretty much every president just gets indicted for something, jailed for something. It's scandal after scandal after scandal, basically. So people are using that to say oh, Nexon's this big company, so they're above the law, and they're using their connections to bully things like this. So why that is contextually important is that, of course, there is a realm of possibility whereby this is all bullshit, and, even if they do have some points, it's not necessarily a legal matter. But that doesn't change the fact that there are things in here that people are looking at and completely discounting, that if are true, essentially mean that Dark and Darker may never release. And I'm not saying that as clickbait. I'm not saying that because, it's going to win me any brownie points, because going against Little Guy and saying that, Big Guy might have some actual merit with this one is not going to win me any favors, is it? People generally don't like this. And I've already seen a lot of comments saying I'm shilling for Nexon. Not sure how that's the case. But I just think that this is way bigger and way more nuanced, especially in a legal manner, than what the general public seem to believe, because obviously people do have a bias here that Dark and Darker is a good game. I like Dark and Darker, want to play the game, hope it comes out, would really love to see that as a consumer. But as I've said before, you cannot just allow people to do things like this if true. Now, again, this is not even a matter of just the simple copyright infringement problem. This is Nexon filing against Mr. A, who is, as far as I know, Mr. Choi, who is the main guy at Iron Mace, for, quote, violating the Act on Prevention of Unfair Competition and Protection of Trade Secrets, and the Act on Aggravated Punishment for Specific Economic Crimes. Now, this is not just guaranteed to be a civil matter, which is why the police would have been involved, because this is actually a bigger problem. And as you can see here, this act in Korean law, the purpose of this is to maintain orderly trade by preventing acts of unfair competition, such as improper use of domestically well-known trademarks and trade names, and by preventing infringement of trade secrets. Now, what is a trade secret? Well, if I'm a company and I'm making something, and you're employed for my company and you are working on that thing, if you then leak the fact that you're working on that and the details of which, allowing somebody else to replicate it, you are in breach of then these trade secrets, right? You only had knowledge of these things because of working for me, and then you've gone somewhere else and given it to somebody or replicated it in some kind of way. That is the crux of the matter. Even if you wrote every line of code from scratch, even if you used all assets from the marketplace, you could still be in breach of this, just on a legal basis, because you only had knowledge of how this game works, exactly how it works, and looked this way because of your breach and infringement of these trade secrets. That's the problem. So I've seen a lot of people like this top comment here. Holy moly, what a joke that DMCA is. DMC takedown over marketplace assets. Game is too similar because it has doors and tortures. This is an actual reason they issued the takedown. Look out for every generic fancy game on Steam. Nexon is coming for you. This is a fundamental lack of understanding of what this actually is. That is not to say that they're DMCAing over marketplace assets. They're DMCAing because they're not looking at this in a vacuum. They're looking at this as the overall project. When you have something that was built, Project P3, that was built inside Nexon, that had the people working that are now at Iron Mace, and it basically had A, B, C, D, E, and F as these features. And then the people who were working on that are proven to have had files on a private server that Nexon didn't have access to, that they told them to stop using, that then make a game that also has A, B, C, D, E, and F in it, and they've used the same exact assets, they've made the exact same game, which they only have knowledge of from working on Nexon's Project P3. That is then the problem. It's not that it's this individual thing that it's because they used assets. It's because that, in conjunction with every single other thing, makes this an actual case, as opposed to, they used assets and we used assets, so therefore, haha, this is funny. That's just not how it works. It's just one piece of the puzzle, basically, that they're arguing that because they used the same assets that they were already using there and made a game that does the same thing. The torches work the same way, the doors work the same way, the characters work the same way, the dungeon works the same way, the walls look the same way, the description is the same way. All of these things point to the fact that they could only make the game in this way because they worked at Nexon on this game and then left and started making this new game. Now, obviously, people will say you can't trademark a genre, and while that is specifically true, that isn't really what they're arguing. So it's kind of a redundant point. They're not saying, we made this genre and they could only make a game similar to this within this genre by stealing from us. That's not what they're saying. They're saying that the game is so similar due to the fact that these people work there, that they could only create this exact game due to using those trade secrets that they stole while working at Nexon. It's not like Escape from Tarkov could sue them for making a game that's like Escape from Tarkov, an extraction-based shooter game. It's not like Blizzard, who made World of Warcraft, could sue any MMO that kind of plays like and draws on inspiration from World of Warcraft. What they're saying is this specific game is such a like-for-like game from what P3 was, and these developers had such intimate knowledge of this game that essentially they're making it with A, B, C, D, E, F, G, continue down the alphabet, all the things being identical. It could only be that closely identical due to the fact that they stole trade secrets when they moved from Nexon to make their own studio. That is the crux of what they're arguing. Not that they've copyrighted a game idea. That's simply not what's being said. The DMCA is not even really the biggest factor here. It's just part of the overall thing. People getting hung up on, oh, they said marketplace assets are the same, so therefore this is funny and silly and Nexon are bullying them. And I just don't see that as being even remotely true, unless you ignore all the previous context and then just make this about marketplace assets. And while IronMace have responded to this and are putting things out publicly, which is good for their perception because people are going to agree with them, that doesn't change anything because literally everybody does this in every single lawsuit ever. You're not going to just not defend yourself. It's just not how it works. And you're also not going to come out and say, yeah, you have lots of valid points here. That's also not how it works. So to say, oh, IronMace responded and that's great because I believe them and this looks really good, it's just not engaging with anything. I don't know how the law works in South Korea regarding things like this, so it's difficult to really get a read, and I'm sure somebody who is a lawyer in the West could probably have a better opinion on this than me. But essentially, when you have all of these things together, this gets way more complicated than the, oh, IronMace didn't do anything wrong because they said they didn't. And in their post where they talk about and say they did nothing wrong, etc., they show, again, all the Unreal Engine assets that they've used and the naming and things like that. And people think this is like a slam dunk own. I really don't think it is. I think that this is going to go on for much longer. And again, I'm not on anybody's side here. I just think that Nexon has way more of a point than what people are giving them credit for. And I think IronMace could actually legitimately be in trouble here because nobody can look at these two games and say that they're not so strikingly similar. Even if you do like a forensic analysis of the code of one game next to each other, which we know the people making Dark and Darker had access to the code because they literally admit to it here. He said he deleted it after. Even if you had access to the code, they could be totally different, but they could have used the code as a baseline to literally just rewrite what they already worked on at Nexon for Project P3 because they're the same fucking people. That's the point. So I think this is going to be an unpopular opinion, but I legitimately believe that Nexon have some point here, and this would be untenable in the industry if companies would just allow people to work on a project, leave the project potentially with files that help them build a new one, just take their idea that they were paid to develop while they were at that company, and then just make their own version. I don't know any other industry where this would be allowed or applauded, but obviously fuck big corporations and fuck Nexon, so of course we have to side with the little guy. I think it's probably way more complex than that. I am going to go through this probably and put my thoughts down on paper and make like an actual scripted video about it, because I do believe it's important, and as more things come out with this, I think it's going to be increasingly clear that this is, again, more complex and definitely more interesting than what we're seeing. But overall, as a consumer, I agree with the idea that I just want this game to come out and play it. But I'm not going to go full on to the hill, accept that IronMace said this, so therefore they're right, and Nexon, I don't like them, so therefore they're wrong. I just think that's like an unhelpful tribalistic way to look at things, and I tend not to do that because the nuance is where things actually are interesting. So yeah, I might be off on a few things here. It's just my, again, non-legal opinion looking through this, reading social media, reading the DMCA, comparing it to actual statutes and stuff like that in Korean law, which you can see. Some of this has come from comments from other people, which have been very, very helpful to find sources like this and look into it. But yeah, I would just say for anybody who's following this, just do so with an open mind and try to look at it objectively. And while the game is good, I don't think just because one company is bad and we don't like them, we should side with a company that have potentially actually done real things wrong. So yeah, hopefully the game does still come out, but I could see this going on for a long time, and some of the possible resolutions to this could be Iron Mace accepting Nexon as their publisher and giving a large kickback to them, being settled out of court for a large sum of money, or the game maybe just never comes out or gets passed over to Nexon. Things like that can happen. If I had to like get off the fence here and just give my opinion on what I think's going to happen based on what I've seen so far, which could change, and again, I've gone through Iron Mace's responses and things like that, I would honestly lean towards this is probably going to go in Nexon's favor. Could be wrong. Bold claim there, but I do think that this is looking increasingly bad for Iron Mace, even with their recent response, which everyone thinks is like totally destroyed any chance Nexon has of winning this one. But we will see obviously soon, because Nexon now, the ball is in their court, how DMCAs work. You file one, Steam looks at it and says, yes, this is a valid DMCA, you filled it out properly, we'll take down the game. And then Iron Mace has like a 10-day window to refute this. And then after that, I think it's a 10-day window again for Nexon to file an official lawsuit, which then, of course, we'll find out what goes on with the actual lawsuit, which will be much more open, and we will be able to see exactly what's going on. So I'll follow along with it, and hopefully something good for consumers comes out of this one. But yeah, it's looking rough, at least from what I've seen. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Peace out.